Hello, everyone. Greetings from San Francisco. I'm Edwin Lozada of Philippine American Writers and Artists, PAWA. We're excited to co-present with Paloma Press, Lara Stapleton's new book. And our co-host tonight is Eileen Cassinetto, the Poet Laureate of San Mateo County and publisher of Paloma Press. Hello, Eileen.
Hi, Edwin. Good evening, friends. It is such a pleasure to be in the same space with all of you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Philippine American Writers and Artists, Inc., or PAWA, is a champion of Filipino culture and literature, and we're very grateful to Edwin, Lozada, and PAWA for co-hosting this event. Tonight, we celebrate the official launch of The Ruin of Everything, a second short story collection by acclaimed author and educator Lara Stapleton. It is published by Paloma Press, a San Francisco-based independent literary press, which I founded in 2016. The Ruin of Everything tells tales of abandoned children living in adult bodies. It asks us what is important to a tale and what it means to be American in country and continents. Laura will be reading from her new book in a bit, but for now, I'd like to call back Edwin, who will introduce our first featured reader. Take it away, Edwin.
Hello again. Our first reader is Ricco Villanueva Siasoco, a writer, educator, and activist based in Los Angeles. His work has been published in AGNI, Joylin, Drunken Boat, and the North American Review. He has received fellowships from the Center for Fiction, Lambda Literary, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. He received his MFA from Bennington College and has taught at Columbia University, Boston College, and the Massachusetts College of Art. He is also a member of Kundiman, a national literary organization dedicated to Asian American literature. Currently, he is the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the Chadwick School in Palos Verdes. Please welcome Ricco.
Thank you, Edwin. And thank you, Aileen. Thank you to PAWA. Thank you to Paloma Press. I am just beyond thrilled to celebrate my dear friend Lara's book. So this is really about her. I'm going to just hold this up again because I don't think people promote books enough. So if you're on this call and you're a friend of Lara, you're a fan of Lara, you should buy this book. I'm on a weird Zoom screen because I'm trying not to show my basement. This is the book. Buy the book. I'm going to read from a story collection I published that's called The Foley Artist. And it's a story called The Foley Artist. I'm just going to read the beginning of it because I think Lara has such a nice ear for language and she has such a unique sense of diction. And this story reminds me the most of her work. This is called The Foley Artist. Barong lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a retail store that sold pornography in West Hollywood. Because he had spent his life adding sound effects to motion pictures, cushioned footfalls on parquet floors, any number of seagulls and crashing waves on boardwalks, the turbulent construction noises and traffic of a Midtown Avenue in Manhattan, he cared little for the winsome tones of the human voice. Dialogue would never hold as much resonance as, say, 5 carefully placed elevator pings. At one time in his life, when he was younger than his 79 years, he'd obliged in small talk, engaging a chatty girl he soon married. Their daughter, Maribel, was born in 1969. But impatient with his wife's pleading and the selfless demands of domesticity, Barong soon walked out. One night, moved by drink and unfamiliar longing for others, he telephoned his wife in Boston and asked to speak with their child. She informed him the teenager had run off with a long-haired musician, then hung up. Barong sat alone in a dingy Chinatown hotel, the receiver limp in his hand, watching a hairy centipede scuttle around the one-toed sandal on his left foot. Instead of the harsh bleating of the telephone, he wanted to Foley a more evocative click. Though he had lived there for 22 years, he had never set foot in the succession of stores below his apartment. A medical supply store when he moved in, the space had gone through multiple reincarnations, at various times a lunch counter, a busy pawn shop, and now a store that sold pornography. When he was working, Barong was infrequently in the apartment, traveling from editing suites to home to crowded docks with his Nagra to record the lazy hum of the crowd or the blare of a barge horn as it pulled away from shore. At times, moved by sudden impulse, he would open his eyes, turn off his Nagra, and watch the crowd drift and bottleneck. Once he retired, his habits were inverted, and he spent most of his days in his apartment. He sold his car and rode the bus to the grocery store, the public library, and a well-stocked video store near Paramount, owned by a Filipino. Barong's parents were dead. His two older brothers were in a faraway province of Ilocos, and the person most familiar with him was Manolo, the Filipino video store owner, formerly a property master who had worked with Barong on a small budget film called Night of Desire. A friendly but not gregarious person, Manolo called Barong Padre and often invited him to his home to celebrate holidays and his children's birthdays. But because Barong never accepted, Manolo, deciding the elderly Filipino snob, stopped extending the invitations. One wet afternoon, Manolo and Barong quarreled over the older man's account, Manolo accusing Barong of unpaid fees. Certain he was in the right, Barong walked out of the video store and selected a Blockbuster in West Hollywood, resolving never to call on Manolo again. Several days passed. Barong watched Telemundo and Technicolor Westerns with the volume turned off and the loud engine of a bus or the heavy bass rhythm of a car speaker drifting through his window. One morning, he scanned his large video library, selected a film in Italian, and inserted the tape into the VCR. The VCR would not play. Barong unplugged the machine and tinkered with it. Unwilling to consult Manolo at the video shop, he hobbled downstairs to the pornography store in hopes of purchasing a new VCR. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ricco. Our next featured reader is Beverly Parayno, whose fiction, memoir, essays, and author interviews appear or are forthcoming in Narrative Magazine, Bellingham Review, The Rumpus, and World Literature, among others. Her writing has been translated into Chinese by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. She has a BA in English from San Jose State, an MA in English from University College Cork, and an MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, where she received a Linda Hall Scholarship. She serves on the board of directors of PAWA and is a grants consultant for social justice nonprofits in the Bay Area. Please welcome Beverly Parayno.
Thank you, Eileen. Good evening, everyone. I just want to say thank you to Eileen for having me and for all the great work you do, especially with Paloma Press. Thank you to my fearless leader, our fearless leader, Edwin Lozada at PAWA. And congratulations to Lara. Thank you for including me in your launch party. I'm so happy for you. So I'm going to read a piece from memoir. I lost a dog last year after 17 years. And he was my best friend. And I know there's some dog lovers here. So I'm writing about my experience with him. So this piece is called Imperfections. Jeff and I met at 3Com in 1995 when I interviewed for a job I was fantastically unqualified for in sales operations. I had just graduated San Jose State with a bachelor's degree in English and had been working part-time in the IT department at 3Com, a mid-sized global networking company in Santa Clara. In fact, half of my family members worked there, which is how I got the job. Brother-in-law, his sisters, their brother-in-law, their brother-in-law's brother, my sister, and eventually my brother. At work, sometimes people would ask me how we're all related, and I'd need to get on the whiteboard to map out the family tree. I knew nothing about computers, nothing about working in an office, nothing at all about IT. But because I felt so behind after having dropped out of high school and running off to upstate New York with Jimmy, I immersed myself in an unhealthy way in the job, learning as much as I could, as fast as I could, volunteering for everything and anything. So much so that a full-time staff person once expressed shock to learn I was just an intern. You need someone to work the midnight shift? I'll do it. You need someone to answer the IT helpline for East Coasters at 6 a.m. Pacific time? I'll do it. You need someone to sit in the frigid server room to monitor the servers for the entire company? That's me. I was 26 years old, starving for experience, recognition, advancement, anything to catch up to everyone else around me, before I knew or understood that we're all on our own personal timeline, long before I knew that one day I'd become a writer and having a teenage runaway story would be something of a gift for me. When I saw the job posting for the systems analyst position in the sales department, I had the balls to apply. No one in my family at 3Com, with one exception, had dared to venture outside of IT. It was like the Filipinos belonged in the support role, in the building in the back, not in any front-facing roles in the company. Behind the scenes, unseen, always accountable if anything goes wrong. This new role would be in Building 100, where the executives and sales and marketing teams sat, the most important and powerful people in the company, where all decisions were made. That I had the guts to enter that building thinking I could work alongside them makes me smile today. There's a reason we're all naive when we're younger. That naivety moves the world, makes the impossible happen. Jeff emerged from behind his colleague Kevin in the conference room on the 4th floor of Building 100 and shook my hand. I can only describe that moment as a whiteout. All my senses so activated, my vision went blank for a few seconds, as if I knew on the spot my life would be split between pre-Jeff and post-Jeff. He had a dimple, fresh face, fit body. He exuded health and wealth. He was Asian. I hadn't dated an Asian man in a long while. My current ex at the time was English. My serious boyfriend before him was Jimmy, the white, long-haired, dropout, weed-smoking, motorcycle-riding boyfriend I ran away with to Hyde Park, New York, his hometown. That men like Jeff existed excited me. That someone like him lived and breathed in the world and intersected with my life on that day felt unreal. They proceeded to interview me about my skills and background, and I even got up on the whiteboard to show them how I would use software tools to replicate sales information nationwide and globally within 24 hours, back when real-time data didn't exist yet. How I'd be the ideal liaison between the national sales team and IT, given my 10-month experience in the IT department as a part-time intern. Later, I would learn that Jeff said, "Her voice is mesmerizing. Let's hire her." Sorry about my dog. We'd spend the next 7 years on and off in a serious relationship until he'd announced one day while I was studying abroad in Ireland for a master's degree that he was engaged to another woman. Around the middle of our time together, I'd meet his family and spend time with his sister who had a black lab. I didn't spend a lot of time with her family or their dog, but somehow this animal made a strong impression on me. This dog linked me to Jeff, his family, our connection, our intense desire and attraction, my deep hurt and disappointment. After my total breakdown in Ireland, after having learned of Jeff's engagement, I'd fly home and recover for several months, including gaining the weight back that I'd lost. I needed a dog, a companion, something to take care of, something to ground me in San Jose in the Bay Area, something to think of other than myself. And the only dog that would do was a black lab. If I couldn't have Jeff, I could have a physical being that served as evidence that we'd once shared a life together. Iso started off as that link between me and my ex, and over the years, he became much more than that. At first, it bothered me that Iso wasn't a full black lab like Jeff's sister had had. A black lab mix. Mixed with what? Shepherd, border collie, his nose longer than a purebred, his body leaner. Little wings of hair grew out from the sides from his neck. When he was a puppy, I tried to smooth them back to make him look more like a regular lab. Tried to preserve the image of Jeff's sister's dog through my own dog. Until one day when Iso was a year old, I sat down next to him, slipped my fingers through his coarse hair on his neck, and pulled outward to fluff it up, giving him a stately mane that was his and his alone. For the rest of his long life, I'd continue to play with the mane, make it stick out as far and high as I could, accepting him for exactly who he was, loving the perceived imperfections so much he grew to be wholly perfect inside and out, trying hard to accept my own self-created imperfections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beverly. Edwin?
Yes. Next, we have Eileen. Our Tabios has released over 60 collections of poetry, fiction, essays, and experimental biographies from publishers in 11 countries and cyberspace. Dove Lion, a fairy tale for our times, published this year, 2021, is her first long-form novel. Her award-winning body of work includes Invention of the Ai Naku, a 21st century diasporic poetic form, and the MDR poetry generator that can create poems totaling theoretical infinity, as well as the first poetry book, Beyond Life Sentences, which received the Philippines National Book Award for Poetry. Please welcome Eileen Tabios.
Thank you. My apologies, Edwin, you were supposed to read it short. And I'm delighted to be here to celebrate Lara's ruining of everything, pun intended. I'll be reading from my novel, Beverly, which came out 6 months ago. And I think the excerpts I'll share might reveal why I felt such affinity with Lara's writings, because I think behind the fictions, we're also deeply concerned with epistemological issues like how we know what we know or what we think we know. So these excerpts also exemplify what I concocted as Kapwa time, where I translate the indigenous Filipino trait of Kapwa as the interconnectedness of all things across all time, which means that there is no past, present, and future, but it can all be collapsed into a singular now. So when I reference dates, you'll notice they're not in chronological order. December 31. Once upon a time, I thought poetry is a fairy tale. From that delusion, I came to stand in front of a gray building. Inside, a stranger awaited for me. I raised my finger to push the dirty white button next to their apartment number 3J. Before my flesh touched the button's chill, I heard faint music. I turned my face towards the sound and saw children playing in a park across the street. In their bright, colorful outfits, they were wildflowers chasing each other in circles. Nearby, a nanny's boombox sent forth innocent tunes befitting innocent creatures. But is anyone really innocent, I thought. I returned my attention to the gray building. February 1. Once upon a time, I heard children laughing but turned my back. I was bored with innocence. I stood in front of an anonymous gray building. I searched the intercom panel for their apartment number 3J. Its resident was a stranger to me, but my searching finger was eager. Decades later, I would hear an adolescent proclaim to the furrowed brow on his cautious grandmother, "Tomorrow is present." Exactly. My finger found the right button and pushed. The world did not end. August 27. Once upon a time, a young poet and an experienced artist looked at each other across an abyss. They each formed their own worlds, and the abyss between them could be measured only in light years. But the abyss too can be a page or a canvas. The empty page longs perpetually for its lover, the writer who would upon it write. The blank canvas longs similarly for its artist who would upon it interrogate space. Aesthetics was not the most important layer to their engagement, but it mattered. The young poet wanted to learn. The experienced artist began with no preconceptions, just curiosity. In the beginning, curiosity sufficed. Curiosity is a form of desire. November 6. Once upon a time, I looked at my reflection on the steel plate of an intercom to a gray building. My hair was fluttering in the slight breeze. A lock stumbled over my right eye, blocking its view. Within that instant, my left eye grasped something I had not discerned with both eyes, an eyelash dangling from another lash, a gust away from falling. When a narrowed focus reveals a previously unknown fragility, one's nature is revealed by whether one aborts vision or not. I did not close my eyes. I shook my head, and both eyes watched as the lash lost its grip and began to fall. As well, I watched myself watching the sunder, the flailing, the fall. September 20. Once upon a time. April 9. Once upon a time, I emerged from darkness to place my first step in a neighborhood containing a gray building. As I walked away from the subway stop, I noticed debris storekeepers had bunched together from sweeping the sidewalk. While the trash awaited the storekeepers' return, some fragments had fluttered away from the small mound. My steps faltered as I noticed the residue scattered by a stray breeze. Some of the random bits looked like black sand. In turn, they evoked black pepper. Like the pepper once rubbed harshly against lips and genitalia in an attempt by soldiers to elicit information. They called the method pepper torture, and it was one of many tools used by a dictator to prop up his regime. Of course, knowledge of that particular experience still haunted. It haunted me, it haunted them. Torture contains a long resonance. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Eileen. We were having issues, technical issues, so I am very sorry to everyone who had trouble logging in. And now, please allow me to introduce the woman of the hour, our final reader this evening, Lara Stapleton, author of The Ruin of Everything. Lara was born and raised in East Lansing, Michigan. Her maternal family is from the Philippines. New York City is her homeland. She was the recipient of Ludwig Vogelstein Foundation Grant for Writers and a two-time winner of the University of Michigan's Hopwood Award for Fiction. She was also the winner of the Columbia Journal Fiction Prize. A graduate of NYU's creative writing program, her greatest pride is for her students at Borough of Manhattan Community College of the City University of New York. Welcome, Lara Stapleton.
Thank you. I just want to begin by thanking everybody for coming. And I want to thank Eileen and Michelle for doing such wonderful things for The Ruin of Everything. And to my co-readers, to Ricco and Beverly and Eileen and Tony for joining this event. So I'm going to read the first few pages of the book. This is the beginning of a short story called The Alpha Male. He was conceived of the one wild beatnik summer of his mother's youth. His father was a foreigner who worked in the kitchen. She was earning a little extra school money as a waitress. The father well understood the nature of the affair, and so as soon as he was informed, he disappeared so that no mutual acquaintance could find him. Having the baby was an act of defiance by which she proved she was morally superior. Her parents disapproved, but she was, after all, their little princess. How she saw herself, one for whom her adorers would do anything. And so she collected such adorers in her life. There she was, storming out in righteous anger, and there they were, following, supplicant, arms spread. She left the city and went back home. It was a small, wealthy suburban town on the East Coast where the obvious was better left unsaid. She married 4 years later to a man who had slavishly loved her since high school. They believed in right and good things, which she determined and explained to her husband. And so there were two things going on. There was their defiant love of the first bastard child. The stepfather made a point of demonstrating that he loved the first like his own. The mother held him just a bit closer in public as onlookers studied the half-brother, that je ne sais quoi about the features, his darkness. There was their right and good defiant love, which manifested in their proud jaws at all public gatherings, in moments of pulling him closer at all events of the extended family, holidays, picnics. But then there was their real embarrassment, which was never given name but could not be hidden, the ever-present unspoken. The mother, she did love her husband. As far as we can determine, it was a love of gratitude for his tolerance of her tyranny, her demands and ridiculous temper. She knew it was difficult. But we may also consider the other possibilities. Sometimes these dictators have a passion which runs as deep as the more obvious lover. They simply recoil from the expression of it. They find this expression degrading. And the mother, she did love her husband in a way of which we can never be sure. And there was Tommy, the living evidence of her errant ways, of her betrayal, cuckoldry. And every woman on God's green earth, nun and harlot and free spirit alike, was taught the fear of looking promiscuous. The stepfather, all his embraces could not erase the more subtle and profound work of his eyes. And so Tommy was raised with a self-conscious feeling of specialness and a feeling of total rejection. There were moments unstudied, when they were washed to their essence at the end of a long day, weary, doing what was to be done, as anyone does, fork scraping, chewing perfunctorily, and he could feel an unnameable emotion radiating from the other four into him. It was intensely hot and cold at once, and he felt he was supposed to do something about it, and if he thought long and hard, he could figure out what. He did think long and hard. It never came to him. His younger brother and sister, 2 years apart, looking like twins, naturally gravitated in together. If the mother saw herself as one leading and adored, then Tommy saw himself as hovering and waiting. He knew himself to be looking on as the others grouped off. And so, as the mother had taken her place, gone to school and took the leadership over other girls, walked in front of them, the son went to school and stood hunched over his books and watched. He leaned against a swing set post and watched. At the very heart of who he was, loneliness in the midst of people, no real connection, no real trust and affection. From television, he learned that he would be tall, dark, and handsome, that he would be slightly devilish and sexy, and that if anyone ever gave him anything, it would be fragile and beautiful women. And so at some point, as soon as the worst of the awkward years were over, he learned a simple psychological principle. He learned the high, shuddering grace of seduction, the simple and obvious and vast and inconceivable knowledge of human nature. He knew he had a right to know. He presented his attention to a girl. He held her eyes a bit too long. He said he liked her shirt, and then he let them laugh as girls do. He let them giggle in conspiracy, and then he withdrew his attention and waited for a sign. It worked, and one after the other, the school's most exquisite dolls relinquished their virginity because they didn't just like him, but loved him, which he never believed. He made himself of the movies. He was dashing, and they'd never met anyone who acted so unselfconsciously, so thoroughly out of dreams. For this, he earned the wrath of his school's male population. He wasn't an athlete, didn't travel among any of the other alpha males of their little world, and he did better than them. He didn't travel with anyone but the girl he was seeing at the time, and there was always the next one. He had stolen more than one girl. It was his mark on the world. He got his ass kicked a few times, and from this he learned to watch carefully, be even more shrewd and strategic. He learned that if he looked insane, he scared people. It had to be a convincing look of insanity. He had to give in to panic and let onlookers see. It wasn't a performance, but a relinquishment. There was a little strawberry blonde who meant something special to him. She was the one who remained in his mind. Her name was Phoebe. She was quieter than the rest. Once in a while, she would say something that he felt he knew all along. She would reflect and say something. He wanted to impress her. She was studious. He found himself working harder in school. He nearly 4-pointed that semester. And yet, he behaved a little differently with her than he did with the rest, with his one important distinction. He never had sex with her, never even tried. He did, however, follow his ritual once he'd set his eyes on her. He sat next to her one day and then didn't for 2. He waited to catch her searching the room for him. We can't hide our searchings, our eyes. And then he sat there again. He knew she didn't trust him. He knew she felt above the banalities of high school, and so he learned a thing or two about poetry, which she wouldn't necessarily know. He told her. He gave it time. She played the violin. She had integrity. And one day he kissed her lightly before orchestra rehearsal and watched her recede down the hall. He felt something he had not felt before. For a moment, he felt an unfamiliar hope, and yet he kept going in the same way he always had. He called Phoebe for a while, then he began calling someone else. He remained a better student, though, and began to develop an artistic snobbery. He read a few books. He wouldn't have acted in high school. The high school productions were musicals, and the athletes who detested him participated, and the outnumbering would have proved humiliating. The idea occurred to him sophomore year in college. Tommy hadn't fared as well in college. This was the 1980s, and feminism, still young, had passed on from its promiscuous phase. And then there was the AIDS crisis, and it just wasn't as easy for a young man to target and plot. Tommy began to feel he had been bad, that to be such a predator was bad. And so without his conquests, he was even more alone. He studied, he kept a journal. For some time, he had his first male friend, a short, long-haired, consummate egghead. It seemed this friend, Edward, remembered every name he came across, heard, read. He knew the names of all the philosophers of Europe. He knew the stories of the empires. He understood literary theory. He told the story of Rimbaud and read him in French. For some time, Tommy was made high by the consideration of Edward the Brainiac. He was honored to be considered his peer. And what Tommy gave back, Tommy, who was afraid his most thrilling years were behind him, edified Edward's efforts with women. Tommy watched Edward's eyes and saw them land upon a girl in glasses. She was not quite so learned as Edward, but enough so to respect and appreciate such things. Okay, Tommy said, okay, give a little, then go away. And it worked. And Edward loved Tommy. With Tommy's help, Edward would be the thinking woman's ladies' man. Edward began to love Tommy oppressively. He studied less and popped by Tommy's room with joints and corny jokes. He made him tapes. At parties, he never left Tommy's elbow. And so Tommy, annoyed, claustrophobic, dumped him. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara.
Thank you.
So we move on to our Q&A portion. And I'd like to ask the first question, and this is for everyone. So I have a soft spot for short stories because I feel that they have a lot in common with poetry. And as multi-genre artists, in particular as writers of fiction, can you share with us any writing quirks or rituals to get your creative juices flowing? Relatedly, whom do you want to feel seen by reading your book? Lara, maybe you should answer first.
I want to be seen by literary readers, right? So when I get the most excited about being read is when I feel like people have something in common with the kind of aesthetic that I have, I guess. So people who really love literature and literature that I don't know. Yikes. People, yes, I want to be seen by literary readers. I'll stop there.
Eileen?
Thank you. I think your first question, Eileen, was whether we had any particular quirks, which is a question I wanted to answer because this allows me to bring up these male dolls, which I've never played with before in my life until I started writing my second novel. And what I realized in developing this second novel is in order for me to feel that the characters, in order for me to feel that the characters are fully developed, they have to warrant receiving a physical avatar, which ended up being, the Ken doll. So that's my particular quirk in writing fiction anyway. And in terms of audience, I always operate as a poet. I think my poems are for anybody and everybody. I tend to go very experimental. And maybe when I was a younger self, I thought that meant I wanted acceptance by the experimental writing community. But actually, some of my best responses to my work have been from people who profess themselves to be untutored or not really well knowledgeable about literature. So now I deliberately write with no particular audience in mind, and I figure, they'll come if they want to come. I can't anticipate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Beverly?
So the question about audience, I really don't have an audience in mind when I write. And I think it's kind of like some kind of miracle when anyone reads your work. So to me, it's, it doesn't matter who's reading as long as they keep reading. That's amazing to me. I have a really weird quirk. I write almost everything in my head first, and then I translate it onto the page. I do that with essays. I do it with memoir. I'm a grant writer by profession. I do it with my grant proposals. It's kind of annoying, but I don't know, just kind of a process that has developed over the years. And so I just walk around working on things, and then when they're ready, I put them on the paper, or on the laptop, I should say.
Thank you, Bev. Ricco?
I wanted to say that I write specifically for a film audience. I used to, I think, write unconsciously for a white readership, and I made a choice to just say, no, I'm going to center films, and that was a big change for me and a shift. And I stopped trying to apologize for things or to translate it for I like this scholar, and she says, instead of mainstream, she says white stream. And that really changed some of my thinking, like, am I associating white stream with mainstream? So it's specifically film audience, and even a film person like me who is 1.5 gen and doesn't always understand everything Filipino is really important for me to center them.
Nice.
Thank you, Ricco. If any in the audience have questions for Lara or any of our featured readers, please use the raise hand icon or drop your question in the chat portion. I believe that our our featured readers have questions for Lara. Maybe Eileen, you can start, and then I see Tony has his hand raised. So Eileen.
I guess Lara, whose work and person I've followed for decades, this is your second book of short stories. And so I wanted you to just share something about the fluent significance for yourself. I mean, why the short story? And specifically my follow-up would be, why the short story versus, say, poetry, at which I actually think you'd be a natural with your mastery of psychological caesuras? And why short story versus the more elongated landscape of the novel?
I do write poetry, though not as seriously and not as often. I thought I would have written novels by now. I actually got involved in in a television project that took up a lot of my life, and I'm taking a break from it now for years. I was on this for over 10 years, and I'm taking a break from it now, and I'll go back to it at some point. But the fact that I haven't written a novel kind of just snuck up on me, honestly. And it's something I just started doing, so I'm working on it now. But I just started writing short stories when I was in college, because that's kind of the form that you write fiction in college. It's what you do in the workshop, and I just kept doing it. It also fit into my life, I think, with how busy I was when I was an adjunct, working a million jobs at once, right? Which thankfully ended. But yeah, I think it hasn't been so decisive. It's been something kind of the way that it flowed, and I really like writing short stories too.
Thanks, Lara. Tony?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say what's up to Zach Linmark, Christina Newhart, and Gina Apostol. And Ricco, thank you so much for saying what you did about centering your work on Filipinos and Philams. It's beautiful, man. You know, I really appreciate you saying that. My question is for Eileen, Tabios, and for the others who read tonight. I know you as a poet, you've written a novel, so I just want to just ask you, you know, if there were any challenges like making that transition, if you ran into any in trying to tackle a novel, and for the other prose writers, if you have problems, you know, transitioning into poetry, or do you find poetry to be a pain, or whatever, whatever the case is. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I think that with hindsight, I don't think I could have managed to write the novel that I did without having first trained myself in and through poetry. I mean, you can tell just from the brief excerpt, I write experimentally, period, whether it's poetry or a novel. And again, one of the things I did in the novel is I wanted to overthrow my perceived tyranny of linear narrative. And so for me to figure out how the way to do that became easier once I understood what I was doing with the forms of poetry. The problem is that and it took me, I think, 20 years to write this one novel. I never knew if I could pull it off. And the problem with having done one is now I'm addicted to it, which is why I always thought after I'd finish one novel, I'd go back to continuing my work in poetry. And of course, I'm doing that. I didn't think that I would necessarily write more novels, but now I'm doing more. So now I understand why Gina keeps writing her brilliant novels, because there's a certain relish and addiction to the form, which I can't get through poetry just because of the scale. A novel is long, but the length of that and the hugeness of that scale is, to me, I find absolutely wondrous. And as you know, poetry can be a minimalist, minimization type of form. So now I think having done one novel, I'm just gonna keep doing that until, the problem is it whitens your hair much more quickly, but that's okay.
Eileen, I believe you have another question for Lara?
No, I was trying to persuade her to come to the poetry camp, but I understand that's okay. We'll move on to others. Yeah.
You know, I really enjoy writing poetry. It might be my favorite form to write in. And I know less about it than I do fiction. I'm less less knowledgeable about it and less productive in it. But to me, it might be the most fun.
Yeah.
Beverly?
No.
So let's see. I wanted to ask you, you've got metafiction going on, you've got autofiction going on, you kind of blur the lines between essay and memoir. Talk to me about just genres that are kind of flowing through this story collection.
You know, I really like experiments in structure, and it's not my highest priority, say, as a reader. I think that there can be experiments in structure that seem gimmicky or heavy-handed. They have to flow from the content. But some of my favorite things I read are things where I feel like I've never seen this done before, right? And I feel like American fiction, especially in the short story, does that a lot less than poetry, right? We're kind of conservative in our forms. And I just like trying things, right? I like, and they come to me the way that they are. They come to me in a different form than that very traditional inverted check mark, right? That we still kind of consider the real form of the short story, but there's no real reason it has to be that, right? And I still write that too. And the other thing is, I actually named a character Lara Stapleton in here, but she's actually not me, so I wouldn't say it's autofiction. But I had fun with playing with that idea, right? So yes, I like blurring those lines. I like something that might feel more like an essay than a story, though it's not it's not true, so it can't be an essay by definition, right? Yeah, I like playing with those forms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beverly and Laura. Claire?
Hi, Claire.
Hi, everybody. This question will not shock you. Can you talk a little bit about how your experiences as a short story? Let me turn my camera on. Hold on for a second.
Sorry, I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
I think people are saying they can't get in through Facebook. The link works, but Facebook won't let me post it. So someone has to email or text it to her. Okay.
Yeah. I had a hard time getting in until somebody sent me the Zoom link.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if there's anything we could do, like maybe put the link on Facebook or something. Just wanted to say that because a lot of people have been saying they have trouble getting in. But anyway, okay, sorry. So
yeah,
Claire,
they're missing a great evening.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. I'm just wondering how your experience as a poet and as a short story writer influence what you do in the classroom with your students. And I'm especially sort of trying to imagine your students looking at you and saying, wow, she does it. She's a writer. She's published. She's actually, it's not just something that she does in a journal, but it's, she's out there. She's doing it. Just tell us a little bit about your teaching experience.
I probably emphasize language, kind of sentence construction more than another person might. Like I do a unit on writing vivid sentences, and I do a number of experiments that are kind of like creative writing experiments, even for their argumentative essays. So I make it kind of more, how do I put this? I make it more prescribed than I usually would. Like, I do say that the best way to kind of to make an argument is organic, but I give them a number of kind of creative writing motions that can really contribute to an argumentative essay. So, and it's just something that I really like as a reader. So if somebody writes a very unique sentence, it's something that raises their grade for me. Right?
I love it.
Eileen. Eileen.
Yes.
Oh, just so you know, there are questions on Facebook.
Okay.
Do you want me to read one?
Yes, please.
Okay. A question from Kimi Sugioka. What are the motivating factors that influence your writing or choice of themes?
What are the motivating factors that influence your writing or choice of themes? I think something makes me curious, right? Some kind of tale that I want to live in. It's just like a little, it can be some little corner of the story that some little thread I start pulling on. And then what it really ends up being can be something very different. And that thing that thing that brought me there in the first place can become only a tiny part of it. But it can happen in so many ways. It could be, somebody I see on the train. It could be a memory from 20 years ago. It could be a sound I heard. It could be, I want to write about twins today, right? So it happens in so many different ways.
Thank you, Laura and Kimmy. Grace DeLucen also has a question. Laura, can you talk about how you found the cover for this collection? How did you know this was your cover? It's so compelling, and I know we're not supposed to judge books by their covers, but I'm
we started looking for a cover, and I just combed the Philippine American artist sites, and there she was. And I think it's really funny that she looks like me. And Facebook even, we were all kind of talking about it. And then, she looks like a young me. And then Facebook even offered to tag her as me one day. And I was like, it's true, we all see it. But there are things that it's more than the fact that she looks like me, which adds to the kind of meta thing. And I had already written this story where I gave a character my name, but she's not really me. It's not really auto fiction, though she has things in common with me. So that adds another level. And then another thing that I really like about this image, I guess I'll hold it right in front of the screen right now so people can see it, is that she's kind of, there's a perfect Tagalog word for that, which I'll explain in a second. She's kind of maarte, right? She's extra, my friend translated it as, right? I like to think of my characters as kind of lugubrious, like, I hope that I've created an interesting amount of ambiguity as to how much they're indulging their own self-pity and how much real tragedy they're experiencing. And yeah, I find her a little bit extra, and I think she adds another level to the story. I was really excited when I found this, and this is a gorgeous painting by Ninette Katigbe. Let me put her name in the chat.
Thank you, Lara and Grace. I believe Ricco has a question for Lara.
Yes, I have a question. And I love following Grace Tulusan, who is an amazing, beautiful writer, and friend to all of us as Filipino writers. Lara, my question has to do with the tension you create with these really powerful characters. And I noticed when I was reading them, this sort of tension between loving and longing. Is like this sort of like yearning and then this desire to be loved. So I was like, how do you create that? Do you want to just talk about a little bit about that, Lara?
Yeah,
I Tommy in the first story.
Yeah, I see them as people who they think that their narrative in their own mind is that they're a victim of tragedy, right? But I see them as, I see the moment of truth as their fear, right? That they're living their lives, and out of some echo of some childhood tragedy, they fear, they start to grow afraid that they can't keep what they have, and then that is what brings the ruin of everything, right? So that longing is for kind of a problem that can never be solved, right? It's an ache for people who fear they can't be whole. See, when I put it all together, I know it's completely instinctual, right? Just imagining them in order and seeing how they would flow. I think when I first imagined this book, I thought I was going to write a book that was kind of a cubist portrait of a breakup, right? So that kind of, there were certain fundamental facts of the decline of a relationship that were similar in all the stories. And that's where I started using the name Tommy over and over again. But it just didn't become whole. A number of stories in this book are that this kind of cubist portrait, but some of them are more different, so they don't really fit into the cube, right? But I had wanted to kind of work with this idea that the important part of the tale is that the book has a psychological whole, and that the important parts of the tale are perhaps not the specific events of each story, but an idea that forms from their juxtaposition.
What I was going to say was that during Beverly's reading, I think her dog was trying to warn us that the Zoom bombers were going to do their thing.
Good.
Sorry about Holly G, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Lara, I have a question. Oh, Eileen, sorry, do you want to go?
No, go ahead, Beverly. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, what was the most challenging story in the collection for you to write and why?
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Oh, God. What was the most challenging story? God, I don't know. I have to look for a second. Do you mind? I'm going to look at the table of contents. That's a tough one. I think probably a story called Arrhythmia, which is actually probably my least favorite story in the piece, in the book. I think it, the way that I like pull things together in the end is very, I feel like I really channel things, right? I don't want to sound corny in that way, but that's how it happens. And I feel like I'm a better writer when I feel kind of visited by ideas than when I pursue them. And that one, I felt like I was kind of forcing it a little bit, and I didn't feel so entirely visited.
It felt less natural.
Yes.
Thank you.
Eileen?
Oh, so I was going to say I watched the Brown Girl interview of you, and I got the sense that this collection was you actually completed this some years back. I don't know if
a lot of it, most of it, yeah.
And what's interesting to me is that I think the world has so changed from say 3 years ago to today, that when your book came out today versus before 3 years ago or earlier, for me, it resonates in a much more direct and visceral way, precisely to receive a book like yours, precisely because the world is so much, has shown itself to be so fragile. And I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to share that observation because I wanted to check that, you know, sometimes we sit on work for many years before it's able to find a publisher, and somehow, to me, I'm kind of like marvel at the synchronicity that a book like yours came out during this time period. That's
really interesting. You know, I had to go back and like change a lot of things that that are really, they're really kind of out of step with the times. So when I was editing it, I had to do some line edits to make things that, a lot of things about gender that readers would really balk at now. And, you know, that I had rethought. But yeah, some of the stories are 20 years old. And some of them are from last year. One of them's from last year. Zach. Hi, Zach.
Congratulations, Lara, and it's good to see you all again. So I have a question, Lara, because I think your last story was just amazing, and it's of course meta, and you talk about the anatomy of writing, like physically, like how the body or certain parts of the body relates to writing, and I wanted to ask you, where did that come from? Because it has a very Renaissance-like source where, you know, certain organs relate to our emotions. Yeah. And here you connect like the parts of the body and parts of the brain along with emotions. It's almost like you're summing it up to equal writing. I was wondering.
I got that from Elizabeth Alexander. I saw her speak. That part of that story is true, that I saw her speak, and she said that that essays come from here, and that poetry comes from here. She kind of moved her hands up from her womb, and then I had been thinking a lot about. I just started to think about how emotions feel in the body, but it started with that, like that, and I started to think about that, like, how does my brain work? How does my brain feel when I'm writing, as opposed to when I'm I don't know, reading or eating, or, you know. So yeah, I actually was inspired by seeing Elizabeth Alexander speak on the issue.
One more. I'm gonna do this like autobiographical, not autobiographical thing, but in the last story, almost as if writing is the one thing or one passion or one sanctuary that the character Lara can go in and feel alive and away from Tommy and the siblings and pandemic. And I was wondering if the same is for you, Lara, the author.
That's probably true. It's I'm as I said the other night to some dear friends of mine around cocktails, that I do have things in common with my characters, but my intimacy issues are different. They're not the same kinds that these characters kind of all seem to have in common. But yes, there's one of my favorite things to do in the world is to wake up and write about my dreams. I just love to do that. And that might be when I feel like, that actually might be when I feel the most alive, when you're just visited by pure creativity and you wake up with it, you know, ready to type. So Gina actually had one.
Gina Apostol.
A question, and it's something that I talk about with when I'm describing your book to people. That I think one thing that your book is doing that people aren't really doing this, situating the people with multiple identities, and you've written about this. And I think the form of the stories work with the multiplicity of identity that you're looking at, and I know that I did compare it to the Bohemia of
I love it.
Those kinds of things. I think because it does have that that kind of like freeing community of people who feel that their identities are seemingly outside and yet so rich, in many ways. So I'm just wondering about that and what you think of the role of this multiplicity is.
Yeah, I was actually talking with a friend about that the other day. I think, starting from identity, right? As Filipinos, we're very unique and confusing people to the psyche of the United States, right? That we're this country in Asia that's Hispanic, that is genetically related to the Pacific Islanders, and who are these people, right? And then I'm biracial, and in terms of identity, I've been told 1,000 times that that I'm a very ambiguous person, right? And that's something else I think I have in common with my characters too, that they're all kind of displaced by that experience somehow. That the character in the alpha male is kind of the child of a wild bohemian summer, of the kind of old money waspy mother, and that is something that kind of repeats, that that a parent did something that's scandalous to the rest of the family, and the child is living out of that space, right? So yeah, I think that singularity of kind of existing in an ambiguous space, in a liminal space on the color line, is something that really interests me, and it's something that I know really well, right? It's the space that I come from. So I guess that's something else that I share in common with my characters too. Oh, by the way, I want to say on November 4th, I'm going to put this in the chat, at KGB, Zach, who just asked a question, R. Zamor Linmark, Gina, Apostol, Sabina, Murray, and I are going to appear.
Yay. And then on Friday, Lara, you have
Friday is the in-person book launch at Vaughn. I'll put this in the chat too. At Vaughn at 7 p.m. masked and vaxxed. and snacks. Masked and vaxxed and snacks. There'll be snacks.
Thank you. Friends, if you enjoyed tonight's event, I urge you to ask your local bookstores to order The Ruin of Everything. And if you have time, to leave a review on Amazon. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Edwin and Paula. Thank you, Eileen, Beverly, and Ricco. Before we end, can we all unmute and turn on our cameras and give everyone here a big hand? Let's also congratulate Lara for this amazing feat of a book. Great job, Lara.
Hey,
Lara.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
And Edwin, my co-host, the last words are yours.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this joyous congratulations to Lara, the ruin of everything. And it's been wonderful to see everybody, some old friends who we haven't seen for a while, and I'm sure everybody feels the same way looking at everybody. It's a great turnout. And I wish you all well. And again, congratulations, Lara, and congratulations to also the publisher and for promoting this. And we wish it well. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everybody. So wonderful to see you.